Hey, good evening. August 24th. It is Tuesday, August 24th. It's 5 o'clock here, Pacific time. And I have the pleasure of introducing you to a guy who's from the south side of Chicago, an amazing man of God. Both him and his wife are just amazing, an amazing couple, an amazing family. And it's just an honor to know him. So just say hello to Isaac. Isaac, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself, what you do, and who you are, and where you're from?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ian. I'll count it an honor that you've even asked me and invited me on tonight. I'm Isaac. I am out of Chicago, specifically the south suburbs of Chicago. I am a husband. We'll be going, me and my wife, Brittany, I've been married going on 7 years next month. I am a father, and my daughter, Eden, she will be 2 in November. I am also a senior leader. I am a church planter. I pastor Encounter Worship Center in Park Forest, Illinois, and our ministry is going on 4 years old next month as well. It's been quite a journey. We've been seeing just the goodness and the favor of God just throughout our process and our journey. I'm also an author. I'm an author. I'm a podcaster. Just a whole lot of different things going on, and I need people like Ian to help keep me focused. So I'm just grateful to be able to be on tonight.
Yeah, it's just amazing, and your work as well, right? You have to like feed your family and stay living indoors and all that kind of stuff. So all of that's kind of important. You're freezing on me a little bit, Isaac. So I don't know if it's
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I don't know if it's you or me. So, but anyway, let's see if we can jump in. So this whole thing is based on the fact that I'm launching. It's like the 4th time I've launched a school for emerging apostles, and for me, it's the emerging piece is really important. It's important that people realize they don't come fully formed. That there is a process to this, or a process to this. That they're not just showing up as the 70-year-old apostle who's moving in signs, wonders, and powers and floating 12 inches above the stage at all times. That there is a journey. We are on a journey, and I think it's giving people permission to be on that journey. But one of the things is because it's, in my experience, people just don't think it's important. I think it might be different, a little bit different, certainly in your church culture than it is in the, large, the Bethel world that I kind of like live in. But tell me from your perspective, like, how important are apostles?
I think apostles are, they're essential. There's been this huge talk in the past couple of years about what's essential. And I believe as it relates to the church, that apostles are extremely essential. I believe that the reason why I believe apostles are essential to the world and essential to the church is because from my understanding, I believe that apostles are what causes the church, and an apostolic foundation is what causes the church to expand beyond the church, to where the church is just not caught on influencing herself, but apostles are those who actually creates a foundation for world changers. So apostleship, I believe, is very important, and I've been blessed enough to have been a part of or been around conversations about apostles in the apostolic most of my life since I was 5. So I grew up in the church. I would never have been in denominationalism or anything like that. So I grew up in an environment where the gifts of the Spirit were prevalent, where they were accepted. Apostles and prophets and all of the gifts were accepted and present. So I've been able to see firsthand just the importance of apostles within the local church.
So tell me a little bit about what the results you've seen have been. Like you're referencing, influencing culture or influencing more than the church, and the positive benefits of being of having the upbringing you've had within a church culture that has always kind of accepted them.
Yeah. So some of the things that I believe that apostles they do is they give language to purpose and purpose beyond the four walls. So I believe that one of the things that you always see when you have an apostle present or apostles present is you'll always see, in a sense, the world that they're assigned to, or the cultures that they're assigned to, kind of adapt to the grace of that apostle. And I believe that apostles, that foundation is important because apostles are equippers, as we know the other, pastors, teachers, they're all equippers, but apostles are those who are actually called to equip. I believe one of the things they do is equip the equippers. So it's just not about, let's say, an apostle influencing a prophet. It's just not about a prophet teaching people how to prophesy within a church environment, where you're on a prophetic team and you minister at a specific time on certain days. But I believe that when a prophet, as an example, is influenced by an apostle, one of the things that happens to that prophet is his paradigm, his perspective is broadened to where now not only are they given the commission and the commission to influence beyond the church, but the people that they're called to influence to make more prophetic is just not about the church, but now they begin to gain a paradigm of not, how Jesus said, we don't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. So now they're influencing. Their prophetic doesn't just work in the church, it works wherever they are, because they learn to live according to the voice of God. So now their work life is influenced by the prophetic. Now their family life is influenced by the prophetic. But I believe that it's an apostolic foundation that gives that perspective of, look, you're called to do more than be good church people. You're actually called to leave an impact in your generation.
Come on. So tell us a little bit about your journey. You're an apostle. You're how did that happen for you? What were the struggles? What were the things that you ran up against?
Yeah, so I love the fact that the name of your institute is Emerging Apostles, right? I love that because, just like you said, it's not something that just happens overnight. Now, I do believe that apostles are born. I do believe that, but I also believe that every gift has their season of maturation. They have their season of development. So for me, but I'm 33 years old now, right? I've known that I was called to be an apostle. God actually started speaking to me about apostleship when I was around 17 years old. I did not, interesting enough, even though I've known since I was 17, I did not receive my, I guess what we can call my apostolic commissioning, or I didn't start walking in my apostolic career, let me say it like that, until I was 27. Oh, so there was a 10-year process where I was learning, a 10-year process, and I'm a self learner too. So I'm reading up on it. I'm getting in environments. I'm learning. I'm understanding my grace. I'm gaining language for who I'm called to be. But for me, I also understood the importance of timing. And I understood that if I would have tried to do what I'm doing now prematurely, that it probably would not be bearing as much fruit because it would have been immature. Yeah. So I was ordained within the church that I was serving in as a prophet when I was 21 years old. So even when I was ordained as a prophet, which I am, I knew that I was an apostle as well. My apostle who ordained me knew that I was an apostle as well. But there was never anything in my process where I felt any sense of haste. That I felt like I have to hurry up and do this. When it was time for me to go out, I believe that I was able to have the wisdom to know that it was the timing. Sometimes it can be frustrating because, you know, as an apostle, even though I believe that apostles can work inside of contexts, every apostle is not necessarily a church planter or, you know, any of those types of things. So I believe apostles can work together. You can have apostles that are actually serving inside of pre-existing churches or organizations. It can still be a bit frustrating because as an apostle, as a visionary, as a builder, there's things that you see, there are things that you experience, there are things, and my process was I had to learn how to be a servant, and I had to learn how to submit myself to other people's visions and learn how to partner alongside them to help birth forth what God had given them to do in a region. And then when it was time, it was almost like an Acts 13 scenario. When it was time, the Holy Spirit spoke and said, okay, now is the time. You know that this is what you've been called to do for all of these years, but now is the time to begin your journey in your apostolic career. And I was 27 when that happened.
Yeah, so good. I mean, I'm always struck with the fact that 27 sounds so young, but Jesus was probably around that. You know, he may have been 30 for anybody that wants to be like a stickler in that. He may have been 30, but he may have been a little bit shy of his 30th birthday. And you know, it's like we struggle with it. We struggle with the fact that only Peter and Jesus were required to pay the temple tax, which meant they were the only ones over 20.
Yeah.
There's a good possibility that the Apostle John was maybe 14, 15, that Mary was probably 13 when she was pregnant, 13 to 15. And yet we have this standard. There are even movements where the leader of the movement has said, you know, if you tell me you're an apostle or a prophet, don't come near me until you're 70 years old or something like that. It's like, really, is that what we're doing? Because it doesn't feel healthy for a start, but it feels then that we're just frustrating a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Saying, no, we're not going to deploy you. And I think it's really hard to be a racehorse and to be stuck in a barn the whole time. Like, I think if God has called you to be a racehorse, then you need to, you know, yeah, that scripture says, if you don't learn to run with the horses, how can you lead men? You know, this is learning how to cope with resources. And you know, it's you bring up an interesting point where you know, there are churches. Just because you're an apostle doesn't mean that you're leading a church. I don't lead a church. In fact, I go to a church, and it's interesting to find a church that is secure enough, where the leaders are secure enough to have you in their congregation.
Yeah.
That I'm not going to try and tip the boat over. I'm not going to try and usurp their authority as the overseer of the local church. But it's kind of an interesting dynamic. And especially as someone who's led a church as well. So
for me, it was a little different because I was 5 when my parents joined the church. So I grew up there.
Yeah, totally. That's healthy though, isn't it? Like, that's healthy, actually, you know, growing up in the same church and the church leadership even recognizing and not being afraid of you, like not being afraid of the call or the anointing on you, because they're not competitive. And, you know, I think if I had one wish, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, but I think if I had one wish about the whole church leadership thing, it would be that we could actually remove competition. Like, this fivefold thing is supposed to be about unity. You know, we're in place until the church is united. So there has to be some correlation between unity and the fivefold. I flew into this region a number of years ago, and there were 3 meetings for unity, 3 prayer meetings for unity on the same week, and they weren't coming together to unite. There were all these little pockets of people praying for unity, but God forbid we actually have to go and do something for unity. And of course, so I would love to get rid of the competition thing. I would love to just wipe it out completely, that we're not competing against each other. Paul was really secure when he said, some say they're of Paul, some of Apollos, some of Peter, some of only Jesus. But listen, we're all doing the same thing, you know? We're all kind of going to the same thing. So I don't know if you had a magic wand. Not that we use magic wands, of course, but if you had one wish granted, like what would you change in the church?
Oh man, that's a good question. You know what? To be honest, I would change the exact same thing. I think that the lack of unity is the greatest hindrance to the church.
Come on.
And to be honest, I think as you were talking, I was just thinking, like, if more people would be gripped by the call instead of their own ambition, I think that's what causes much of the competition and, you know, the pride and all of those things that arises within the church, is that people are not gripped by, I believe people are not really gripped by the call of God, because, you know, the call of God is a selfless call. You know, there is no ambition, a selfish ambition, when you're gripped by the call of God. And I think that we just have to, as a church, we just have to do a lot better with that. So that would be my wish as well, is that we would come and that's Paul's wish too. You know, like that's just the call, that we would come into the unity of the faith, in the into the knowledge of the Son of God. And that causes so much division. You know, even here in Chicago is overly saturated with apostles and people who call themselves apostles and churches. And I believe at one point, I think at one time, was it Chuck Pierce that wrote that Illinois was the apostolic state? It might have been. But there was, I believe in a book or in a prophetic word, and I think they went through all of the different states, and they said Illinois was an apostolic state because of, I guess, the presence of so many apostles. But what would happen if all of these apostles actually got on one accord?
Right.
You know, actually were not afraid to work together, and do something for the city.
Yeah.
You know? So that's definitely, if I had a magic wand, that's what I would do.
Yeah, it's incredible. But the thing I mean, we've spent some time together, Isaac, and the thing that I notice about you is you're a son. Like you've learned the suffering of obedience of being a son. Like you've learned how to do that. Like even in your introduction to This Is How I Became an Apostle, it was serving someone else's vision. Like this is about getting under someone else's vision and lifting them up, but no expectation from you that you're going to get a reward. And of course, what are you doing right now in your church? Is you're raising up sons and daughters. Like that's what you're doing. That's what you and Brittany are doing. Is that it's not just ministers to go and minister, but they're actually going to carry a culture of heaven, which is Father, Sons, you know, and Holy Spirit. You know, so. I think that's incredibly important, and something that I think you demonstrated. I think you demonstrated I think you leaked that, you know. We can't give away what we don't have, right? So what you're giving away is this whole sonship thing, which I think is incredible. We're totally open to questions. If anybody wants to throw in a question or two, that's fine. Otherwise, we can just keep talking and talking and talking.
Sure.
What would you say? What would you say is like the greatest hurdle for people with apostles? Do you think there's one thing that if people are like, if I'm struggling with accepting this, and obviously you're brought up in an environment where it isn't a problem, but you hear talk, you hear people chatting. What would you say is like, is there a stumbling block for people when it comes to accepting apostles?
I think probably the greatest stumbling block is understanding really what apostles do. I think that could be a stumbling block, because if you have a misconception of it, it can seem, I guess, falsely. It can seem elite. It can seem as if people are trying to place themselves in this untouchable category of leadership. If you're a pastor pastoring the church, and if you have an apostle within your church, you could see them as someone, well, this is an apostle. How does this work within this context? Does that mean that they have to now to submit myself to them? You know, like it's so many different misconceptions, misunderstandings about what apostles are and what they do. I think that becomes a huge stumbling block for many people accepting that grace within the church. And primarily, I believe that the greatest template for apostles is what Jesus gave, which is the greatest among you shall be your servants, you know, and feet washers. Yeah. And I believe that if apostleship is presented in that kind of way, it's not as frightening as it is in many cultures.
Right. Nor is it as a sexy, right? It's not like you're not sort of signing up. You're not putting the magnet on the side of your Cadillac saying you're an apostle if what it means is that you're the chief foot washer of the congregation, you know? Yeah. Now maybe, you know, that maybe people would be, I don't know, would that be a humility award you would get or something? I don't know. But, you know,
there would be no award.
There would be no award. That's so true. Yeah, I think it's bizarre that we've kind of perverted it into this hierarchical notion that, you know, the Greek word first for first apostles is proton, which is where we get prototype from. Yeah. And there's something just like, here's a prototype. It actually isn't any different than anything that's come after it. But here's the prototype. I think I kind of find in our trainings and in talking to people that there's almost an embarrassment about people saying they're an apostle, that it's kind of because of all the baggage that's come with it over the last 50 years or whatever, that it means that I am the guy who is usurping authority and doesn't do relationships well, much like a prophet, hasn't learned to do relationships real well, hasn't learned how to be tactful, sort of comes in and says, you know, I use the sort of Darth Vader kind of thing, you know, okay, I'm going to be your father now, you know, look, I am your father. And instead of learning how to build relationships, build trust and all that. So I think there's a bit of embarrassment. Do you think it's important that we call ourselves apostles?
That's a good question. I believe that it is important. Not necessarily that you have apostle on your business card or on your website or anything like that, but I believe that it is important that it is identified, because really what you're describing is a grace. And if graces are not identified, the church becomes mundane. So I think that we have to begin to identify the various graces. And if grace is not identified, when can honor ever be placed on grace? Right? So I do believe that it is important. Like, I know it's like this in many churches in your world, but even at Encounter Worship Center, most of our partners within our ministry call me by my first name.
Yes.
And there's no dishonor there. And my biggest thing is, it doesn't matter if you call me Isaac, if you call me apostle, whatever it may be, as long as you acknowledge the grace that's on my life. And if there's a sense of, if there's honor there, a culture of honor there, where for one, as an elder, as a senior leader, and as an apostle, that grace is there, and if there's honor there, then it doesn't matter what you call me. But I do believe that the acknowledgement of it is, I believe it is important for the church. Yeah. And one of the things that I've heard arguments in the opposite direction of this as well. But I believe that God establishes church a particular way to function a particular way. And we cannot be scared of what God set in place, of what Jesus set in place.
Yeah, that's really good.
Especially if we want to really see the church be healthy. The only way the church can be healthy is if we do it Jesus's way. Yeah. So that's what I believe.
Yeah, it's really good. I like that. I think I have a blog post about please don't call me pastor, because you know, people, for me, it's important that you don't call me pastor so that you're not having an expectation that I'm a pastor, or even you don't even know, you know, most people don't even know what a pastoral grace is. They think it's the church mouse instead of being the, you know, the guy that's going after the lions and the bears. Yeah. Like the shepherd who's actually going after to hunt down lions and bears, and it's, you know, it's the shepherd that's leaving the 99 to go after the one. It's not the evangelist, it's the shepherd that's doing that. Whereas we have this notion that it would be a pastor who's looking after the 99 and making sure all their felt needs are being met and all of that. That's a different gift, I would say, than the pastor thing. So if people are calling me pastor, they're going to be really disappointed. Just really disappointed. And it's not the first time that would have happened, but I certainly don't want them to call me an apostle. Again, I just want them to understand the grace that's on my life. I tell people I won't, if you have the gift of tongues, I'm not going to call you Tongues McGinty or whatever it is your name is. So I'm not going to call you by the grace that's on your life. And I would appreciate the same. But Kristen has a question for you, Isaac. How do you identify an apostle?
I think that's a good question, Kristen. So with grace, period, when you're identifying grace, Paul said this. He said, I am what I am by the grace of God, right? So one of the things that I think the church kind of needs to move away from is the notion that I have a checklist and I can check off of this list all of these different things. So you're administrative, check. You work miracles, check. You plant churches, check. You whatever. You have spiritual children, check. Whatever it may be. Because really what that does is that takes the spirituality out of identification. If we can just look at a checklist and say this person is something because of all of these checkpoints. Because honestly, Kristen, what can happen is someone who wants to be something, all they have to do is do all the things that's on the checklist to be identified as it. First things first is that grace is something that's spiritually discerned. So you can't take the spirituality out of it. You can't take the discerning of spirits out of it. It takes a spiritual person to discern spiritual gifts, even people. So I think first and foremost that spiritual discerning, and then I think that the proof of what's spiritually discerned will be much of the manifestations that they say accompany apostles. So it's like we have to flip the way that we do things. We look at the checklist and then we try to put a spiritual title on someone instead of spiritually discerning the grace and then searching for the fruit of that grace. Likewise with the other gifts as well. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think you did. So, it's awesome. Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. I'm not a fan of lists, just not a fan of it. People come to me and say, listen, can you tell me how I'm going to know that I'm a son of the house? Can you give me the list of things I have to do? And I would use the analogy of Rachel giving me a list of things that I have to do in order to prove that I love her. And I can work the list and never change my feelings at all, never change anything. I can work the list and she'll still not have, I still won't have her heart, or she won't have my heart. And I think it is that sort of, that place of understanding. And one of the things, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but one of the things, you look completely different to me as an apostle, right? Like you're the son of a different house. You're the product of a different apostle, right? So you are your apostleship, the dust of your rabbi, to use the old Hebrew phrase, the dust of your rabbi is different than the dust of my rabbi. So we're going to look different. So it's really difficult to get all the check boxes done. It's really difficult to say, hey, in your world, this is important. This is important for apostles, because that's who your apostle is, or your, super apostle, or whoever is the apostle of apostles. This is kind of the man of God's thing here, and this is their, these are their values. This is their culture, and you're walking in that. But I'm over here serving in a different stream, in a different place. But there are some things that are similar. And I think the thing that's similar, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I think this thing that's similar is sometimes when you're a prophet, when you're functioning in your prophet,
Mm-hmm.
And you maybe shake the hands of someone and you realize, oh, I think they're a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever experienced that?
Yeah.
And you do what I call the Terminator scan. You're sort of like, you're sort of, scanning them to go, oh yeah, this person is a prophet. And it's exactly the same with the apostle thing for me. It's like, there's stuff that you see or discern on the other person that is esoteric. It's hidden from most people. It's kind of that thing that it's like a secret knowledge, it's like this sort of, and I don't want to get into all that kind of stuff, but it's kind of this resonance that happens spirit to spirit. Oh, I recognize the grace that's on you. So I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, I do. That's the first time we met and we went out for breakfast. I felt that the first time we met. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I love the Terminator scan. I was actually getting a meeting, and one of the top prophets, who's a top prophet in the US, and I'm walking, and I could see, he saw me, and he immediately went like this, and I'm like, oh, he's scanning me right now. He's actually, in the spirit, this guy's actually scanning me. So, but in a really good, healthy way, not in a way to create distance or to judge or anything like that. It's just, oh, I recognize this. I tell people a lot that you can kind of smell them. You can kind of smell what's on an apostle because it smells like life. It smells like life and like, fresh cut grass and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I don't want to be all weird.
Oh no, I get it completely. And I don't know if that's with all apostles, but I have found that one of the things that people who are apostles, I've seen a lot of them, and I know that it happens with me. I'm sure it happens with you, where you can identify just graces on people.
Yeah.
And you can meet them for the first time. And I know you're talking about that kindred apostle.
Yeah.
Apostle, this person has something that's kindred or something that I carry that's but also with other gifts, like, yeah. And I guess if an apostle, one of the things that they do is equip the other gifts,
right,
then it would be important for them to have an innate, I guess, ability or grace to be able to identify other graces.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes,
anything I'm missing? Anything you'd like to impart to people? Any knowledge? What's your wisdom for people that are sort of searching around, saying, "Oh, I don't know what the next step is." Oh, is there a nugget that you have to say, "Hey, don't do this," or "Don't forget this"? Or...
Yeah, I think it all just boils down to having a servant's heart, being not ignoring the signs that are within you, I guess. And what I mean by that is there can be sometimes where if you, I guess the way to say it is if there's a grace that you operate in or something that you're called to do, in many cases it'll be what's natural to you. It may not always be through a dream or an angel knock at your front door and tell you, hey, this is what you're called to. Much of it is your makeup, and not to ignore what's been placed on the inside of you and to accept it, even if it looks different than what you may see in other people.
Yeah.
And also I would probably encourage to embrace the process and the journey, because the journey and the process is the way into maturity. And sometimes there can be, especially if you are called as an apostle, many times there can be this sense of haste and even external pressures to speed up the process. But you have to walk your own path, and you have to embrace the process and the journey that God has you on, because every season that you go through has purpose. So I would just encourage everyone who are on here in those things. And also it's good to relate to other apostles as well.
Yeah.
They will help to pull out of you the things in which you may not even see within yourself.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me that once you recognize the grace on the other person, it doesn't matter whether they're 17 or 70. It doesn't matter, because you're actually honoring the grace that's on. And I don't mean that in some way, hey, we honor the office. It's not about the office. It's about, like the fivefold are not offices per se, but it's actually just making sure that I'm recognizing what Jesus has placed on you for my benefit.
Yeah.
I think the apostle thing, the one thing I would tell people is that this journey of apostling is a death to self. Like you will learn all about how much you fear man the minute you say, okay, I'm interested in this. You'll learn very, very quickly how much you fear man, and you might learn a little bit slower how much there are some people in the world you're always going to be a stumbling block to, and there's some people in the world you're always going to be an answer to. And it's important that we know that we're ministering to the people we're an answer to, and not paying attention to the ones we're stumbling blocks to.
Yes.
And within all that is this journey of actually coming out as someone who no longer is ruled by the fear of man. So Isaac, if people want to know more about you, how do they do it? Do they want to buy all your books, hear all your stuff, sign up for all your stuff? Where do they go to? We'll post it down below.
So you can go to my website, IsaacWatsonMinistries.com. I think my wife is on here too, so she may be able to type it in. I thought I saw her on here. But IsaacWatsonMinistries.com. I'm the author of 2 books. I wrote a book I had to grab them. I wrote a book in 2017 called Access Granted. It's a book on intercession, prayer, unlocking your potential as an intercessor. And in this book, I really encourage it's a quick read, but I believe that it's essential because one of the things that it does is it debunks the idea that only a select group of people are called to be intercessors, or the ones that are, the old mothers or women in the church that moans in the corner, that they're the intercessors. But literally everyone's called to be an intercessor, because quite honestly, there's only one intercessor, and that's Jesus. And as we stand in him, we are also given the responsibility of prayer and intercession. So you'll learn some things in there about Christ the intercessor, and also what that looks like for us, what it looks like to be members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones, and so forth and so on. And I also wrote a book this year that was released this year called Misplaced, Discover Your Purpose in the Prophetic Plan of God. And this book is for every believer, because every believer is called to be prophetic, but it's also intended to help you kind of differentiate. There's a lot. I think one of the biggest questions for prophetic people is, how do I know if I'm a prophet versus how do I know if I am prophetic? And one of the things that I talk about in Misplaced is I talk about the prophet and the intercessor, because one of the biggest misconceptions is that if you flow heavily in the gifts of the Spirit, specifically the revelation gifts, that it means that you are a prophet, when really intercession unlocks the gifts of the Spirit in your life. Prayer unlocks the gifts of the Spirit in your life. So we have to be able to identify what prophets are called to do beyond prophesying and operating in revelation gifts. So Misplaced is a practical book that kind of unblurs the line between the prophet and the intercessor, and just kind of helps to give you language without getting super duper deep into it. And you can also follow me on social media, Isaac M. Watson. And that's about it. We also have an event. If you are in the Chicagoland or Southwest Indiana area, we are having an event this Friday. Actually, I'm sorry, it's at capacity. But you can tune in, because we are going to be streaming it. And you can tune in. We're calling it Revival Culture Night. And I believe that revival is not a series of events or even an event, but it's a culture. And more so than an external culture, it's an internal culture that we carry wherever we go. when we say we're revivalists, really what we're saying is we are marked by heaven, and we're called to mark what we're called to influence with heaven's influence. So tune in through that. If more seats open up, just look out for it. I don't think so, but just look out for it. And yeah, this was a complete honor, Ian. I absolutely, you know, I love you. I love Rachel. You all are in my heart, and you all mean a lot to me. And I just consider this an honor to be invited to have this conversation with you.
Hey, well, I only have it with real apostles, so that's the thing. So we've had, we had Paul Manwaring on, who I think is an apostle. We had Danny on, who is probably one of the most apostolic pastors around. And I thought we'd circle back and have another real live apostle, and particularly someone that's not in their 60s, So, yeah. So you came immediately to mind. But anyway, all right, guys, thank you so much. buildingcontenders.com/emerging apostles if you want to hear any more about it. And if not, then just stay tuned. But thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. And we love you.